You're listening to Long Distance. I'm Paola Mardo. When I moved to America, I was a sophomore, and one of the first classes I took in high school was US history. My teacher was weird. We had what he called open book tests, so we didn't really have to study. And he played movies during those tests. One time, I think it was Pirates of the Caribbean. This teaching style was so different than what I was used to back home. But that wasn't what struck me the most. It's that when we got to the part of American history set in the Philippines, there was just one paragraph in our history book, less than half a page, dedicated to this period of American imperialism. I think that paragraph mentioned Emilio Aguinaldo, who became the first president of the Philippines, and the acquisition of the Philippines by the US from Spain in 1898. That's it. Nothing in those pages talked about the bloody Philippine-American War. There was no mention of the American occupation that took place for almost half a century. And it definitely didn't talk about Filipinos who came to America during this time. Not as immigrants, but as nationals, subjects of American empire. The generation of Manongs who were promised with the riches of the American dream, but who faced the harsh realities of American life instead.
I mean, when we think about the history of the United States, we say, oh, Boston, the Boston Tea Party, we all learn it. This is white America.
That's Gail Ramasanta, a writer and publisher who is the co-author of Journey for Justice, a new book that shares the story of a Filipino-American labor organizer and community leader left out of most American history textbooks. The tough-talking man with a mustache, glasses, and sometimes cigar, Larry Itliong.
He was and is a Filipino American leader who united Filipino Americans and other ethnicities.
Gail co-wrote Journey for Justice with her friend, the late professor and historian Dawn Bahulano Mabalon. You might remember her from episodes 1 and 2 of this podcast. They both grew up in Stockton, California, and they didn't learn about their city's rich Filipino history until they went away to college. It's why they wrote the book.
This book needs to be in schools and in libraries, in the hands of our families and our caregivers, so that they can say, oh, I was part of American history.
Obviously, I didn't learn about Larry Itliong in high school. I don't think I even heard about him in college, and I took Asian American studies. Yet to many, Larry Itliong is a Filipino American civil rights hero, a leader in that first generation of Filipinos in America, and even in the diaspora.
He led the Delano Grape strike, and people don't really know what that means. And that really is a point where we had so many Filipinos and their jobs were in jeopardy and they had so much to lose. Nobody had health insurance, major resources. They didn't have any political clout. They were migrant farm workers.
On this episode, a chapter in American history we should have learned about in school. The story of Larry Itliong and the Great Delano Grape Strike, a pivotal moment in the American farm worker movement. Most people have heard that Mexican-American labor leaders Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta were a big part of this. Not a lot of folks know that it was Larry Itliong and the Filipino farm workers who kickstarted the whole thing in the first place. So now, we're taking a trip to Delano, where I meet some people who spent a lot of time keeping the city's Filipino-American history alive. And I'm taking some of what I learned from the book Journey for Justice to dig into Larry Itliong's life and work, how he came to America, and how he and a group of Filipino farm workers fought the man and won. Sort of. Oh, and heads up, there is one expletive at the very end.
My name is Christine Boholano Block.
I meet Christine, a former school teacher at Filipino Hall, a community center in Delano, California. Her daughter is Dawn Boholano Mabalon, who passed away just before her book Journey for Justice was published. We're at the launch event for the book, which draws from their family's farm worker roots.
I grew up on a little farm in Tracy, California. My mom and dad and my brother and I, we worked in the fields picking tomatoes, cherries, peaches, grapes, you name it, we did it.
There are a lot of folks like Christine here who grew up on farms and whose parents, grandparents, and relatives were farm workers.
See, both my parents had college degrees, but they never dreamed that they could get, a job, a decent job, because there was so much discrimination against Filipinos. Filipinos thought their only option to work was in the fields.
The book launch has panels and speeches, musical performances, including anthems sung by Christine's other daughter,
Whoa, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave?
and her granddaughter. It's clear everyone here is proud of Delano's Filipino-American history. But they also feel it's a part of history that's been overlooked, and they want that to change. One person who many here agree has been pretty much overlooked by history books is a man named Larry Itliong. And to tell his story, I'm going to need a little help from my fellow producer, partner, whatever, Patrick Epino. Hey, Patrick.
Sup?
Okay, so this is the part where we do a little historical reenactment, so to speak.
Love it.
And you'll be playing, surprise, Larry Itliong.
Awesome.
By the way, you're also playing all the other parts. Cool?
Wait, what?
Here we go. Modesto Dulay Itliong, also known as Larry Itliong, is born on October 25th, 1913. He lives with his parents and brothers and sisters in a small town called San Nicolas in the province of Pangasinan in the Ilocos region of Luzon.
Larry, dinner's ready.
Hey, Larry, your mom says dinner's ready, huh? Tell your brothers and sisters to come in.
All right. Hey, you guys, let's eat.
Even though his parents are poor farmers, Larry has a good childhood and grows up in a loving family. Right now, the Philippines is a colony of the United States. American teachers run the public schools and teach students to speak English. So when Larry tries to speak his language, Ilocano,
Ooh, I get a gold star sticker? Thank you, Ms. White. I get manak.
the teacher smacks his hand with a ruler.
Ow!
Still, like a lot of his classmates, Larry dreams of going to America.
Wow. America.
His teachers talk about the United States as the best, most modern country in the world. Larry's neighbor leaves the Philippines to work in the farms and plantations of Hawaii, then California, like thousands of other young Filipino men at the time. These young men would later be known as the Manongs, which means uncles or older brothers in Ilocano. Larry's neighbor writes to him and tells him about the land of opportunity.
All right. A letter from Manong Rogelio. He's the coolest. Dear Larry, hope you're doing well in school. Better study hard so you can come to America. You can finish high school and college here really fast. From Manong Rogelio. P.S. Did you know you can pick money off the trees and the streets here? Cool. America.
Larry decides he wants to be a lawyer.
I'm gonna be an abogado. I'm gonna help people.
Even though he's just 15, Larry convinces his family to let him go to America so he can go to school and become a lawyer. He's a scrappy kid, so he saves up some money and buys a ticket to board a ship to the United States. But when he lands in Seattle, Washington in 1929, he's surprised by what he finds. First, he runs into a tito.
Oi, Larry! Welcome to America.
Tito, so good to see you.
Good to see you. May pera ka ba?
Tito asks him for money.
Wait, what? I'm out of work and, need rent and food money.
Then, when he meets other Filipinos in town, Larry finds out many of them are house cleaners, servants, farmhands, or alasqueros, workers in the salmon canneries of Alaska.
Larry, good to meet another Ilocano, huh? Yeah, right on, Manong. What do you do for work around here? Do you work at a law office, the university down there, maybe City Hall?
We're Alasqueros. We head up to Alaska during cannery season. Then we go up and down California and Washington. Sometimes we even go to places as far away as Montana. You know where that is? It's far. We harvest fruits and vegetables. Grapes.
Larry
asparagus.
learns that many of these alasqueros and manongs had planned to go to school, just like him. But they needed money. And because racism and the Great Depression, the only jobs they could find were in service roles or migrant labor. A lot of them dropped out of school or never went at all. By the 1930s, Filipinos make up about a third of the agricultural workforce in the United States.
Wow, this is America.
Larry finds himself on a train to his first job at a farm in Montana. With a crew of Filipinos, he picks beets under the hot sun during the day and in freezing temperatures at night. No rest, proper bathroom breaks, or clean water. The bunkhouses where they sleep are dirty. It's backbreaking work for very low pay. This becomes the norm as Larry moves from job to job, following the crop cycle. This opens his eyes to the harsh truths of living in America as a Filipino.
It is a privilege and an honor to be with a young group of Filipinos that are trying to understand and are trying to find out where they're coming from. I know that many Filipinos don't exactly know where they are, don't exactly know where they're going, whether they want to be identified as Filipinos or not. Because Filipino identification is not the best identification in this country. Filipinos have been locked down for many, many years in this country. Filipinos are locked down because we were brought here primarily in the early 20s as laborers.
That's Larry Itliong, speaking to students at UC Santa Barbara in the 1970s, decades after he first arrived in America.
Although the Americans that were in the Philippines say to us that the United States is a land of freedom, a land of equality, a land of justice. The other side to that story, they say that you go to the United States, you pick money on the trees. You pick money on the street, I'm a son of a farmer, Why don't I go to the United States and pick money on the street? Because when we arrived in this country, we were paid at that time 8 cents an hour, 10 cents an hour. That is the kind of beginning that we were confronted in this country.
Larry's early experiences in America are what fueled him to become an organizer who rallied Filipino farm workers together to fight for fair wages and better working conditions. One of his greatest challenges came in 1965 in what is now known as the Delano Grape Strike. That's after the break. I'm your host, Paola Mardo. Tune in to Long Distance at longdistanceradio.com. Hey, Patrick.
What's up?
What you doing?
Working on an episode of Long Distance TV, the video documentary companion series to Long Distance Podcast.
Cool. So, what does it actually take to make long distance TV?
Well, after we figure out the story, I have to shoot, log footage, and edit, and edit.
Right.
edit,
And there's sound design, mixing, color correction, uploading. That's a lot of work.
Yeah. What about you? What does it take to make the podcast?
I gotta do research, pre-interviews, book interviews, record interviews, transcribe and log tape, write, sound design, and edit, and edit, and edit.
Sounds familiar.
Yep, but we love working on this, right? And thankfully, this season, we have support from the Google Podcast Creator Program and from some of our long-distance listeners.
Cool. So if listeners want to support the show, how do they do it?
The best way to support Long Distance is to join the Long Distance Radio Club Patreon. It's a membership platform where you can support us while we make the show, with special perks and updates.
I can confirm there are special perks and updates.
But there are other ways to help too. You can share the show on social media and in real life, or rate and review it on Apple Podcasts.
Head to longdistanceradio.com/support to find other ways to help.
Now, back to the show.
All right. Edit and edit and edit and edit and edit.
The year is 1965. The Vietnam War is escalating.
I have today ordered to Vietnam the Air Mobile Division and certain other forces which will raise our fighting strength from 75,000 to 125,000 men almost immediately.
Malcolm X is assassinated.
Just then, the gunfire went off, and his hand was up. I remember this. I turned around quickly, and the next thing I saw was Malcolm falling back in a dead faint.
Martin Luther King Jr. leads a series of civil rights marches in Selma, Alabama.
Today I want to say to the state of Alabama, yes, sir. Today I want to say to the people of America and the nations of the world that we are not about to turn around. Yes, sir. We are on the move now. Yes, sir. Yes, we are on the move, and no wave of racism can stop us. Yes, sir. The burning of our churches will not deter us.
And in California, poor farm workers, faced with racial discrimination and economic hardship, are organizing for their rights as workers and as people. Okay, so quick recap on the history of farm workers on the West Coast, and specifically California. Immigrants had been exploited as cheap farm labor for years. First Chinese and Japanese migrants, then Filipino nationals arrived in the 1920s. Mexicans became a large part of the farm labor force around the same time. But also, just poor folks of all backgrounds looking for work. Black, white, brown, were exploited. They lived in shabby wooden bunkhouses near the fields where they worked for hours under the sun. Some even lived in former concentration camps, which housed Japanese Americans during their internment in World War II. Since they first started coming over in the 1920s, Filipino farm workers had tried negotiating for better working conditions and wages with their bosses, usually white guys called growers. They held strikes, started organizations and unions. They were often met with violence, or they'd lose their jobs. Growers would hire other ethnic groups instead, scabs to their strikes. Like the immigrants who came before them, Filipinos were thought of as hard workers who were obedient, easy to control, but they were also militant. Having lived through years of race riots, shootouts, violent confrontations with police, growers, and scabs, it wasn't uncommon for Filipinos to draw knives on the picket line. Larry Itliong came up in this old-school militant tradition of striking and labor organizing, and by the 1960s, he was a leader of a union that represented farm workers called the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, AWOC, which was supported by a larger union, the AFL-CIO. Larry worked with the likes of Mexican-American activist Dolores Huerta and Filipino-American organizer Philip Veracruz, who called Larry the most powerful Filipino leader in AWOC.
He had the most experience. I mean, he'd been in a lot of strikes, and he was the head of AWOC at the time.
That's Miriam Powell, a journalist and historian who spent almost a decade writing books and articles about another famous labor leader, Cesar Chavez, and the United Farm Workers, which we'll get to in a bit.
In terms of the nuts and bolts, like being a labor leader, running a union, Larry was the guy, absolutely.
That's where our story picks back up. As a union organizer and leader, one of Larry's jobs is to visit farms in the Central Valley to recruit new AWOC members. He even moves his family to Delano, where he organizes the mostly Filipino grape workers. In May 1965, opportunity knocks in nearby Coachella Valley, where there are also Filipino grape workers who need help. Here's Patrick again as older Larry.
I hear some workers are getting paid $1.40 an hour, and Filipinos are getting $1.25 an hour. Now, that don't make a lick of sense to me. It's time to strike.
Okay, so to strike meant the workers would stop working until their employers, the growers, listened to their demands. But striking as farm workers wasn't going to be easy. They were going against big agricultural business. Agribusiness. The man.
Agribusiness was the most powerful industry in California at that time.
Miriam Powell again.
Farm workers were really the poorest people who also had no protections. All of the sort of existing health, safety, and labor laws that applied to other professions did not apply to farm workers. You know, they could be fired at will. They could be made to work any kinds of hours. There were no restrictions, no health or safety requirements. So for them to take on this enormously powerful industry was, you know, a huge challenge.
When the farm workers decide to go on strike in the Coachella Valley, they don't go to the fields to work. Instead, they picket and demand for better wages. They hold up signs, march, sing, chant, confront the growers. They don't get paid, and some workers are even arrested. But in 10 days, the growers give in. The workers get their 15-cent raise.
All right, let's pick these grapes.
After the harvest, Larry and the farm workers head north to the next job, the grape fields of Delano, where they hope to get the same raise. But the growers refuse to give in. So the farm workers hold a meeting at a community space you might remember called
Filipino Hall. Let's do this.
Delano has a thriving Filipino community with lots of farm workers and members of AWOC. So they actually establish a Filipino Hall, and at this meeting, it is packed. It's mostly Filipinos, but there are also some AWOC members who aren't. They're Black, Puerto Rican, Mexican, even white. Their backgrounds may be different, but they all have one thing in common. They've suffered enough under the growers, and they want real change. Now.
We need a raise. My family and I can't live on this anymore. Hey, we aren't getting any younger. We need better wages and a union today. Dude, these bunkhouses suck. I'm freezing my ass off here, huh?
Larry and the other union leaders hear the farm workers. But understandably, they have concerns.
If we strike, you might lose your house. You might lose your car. Your family might be on the streets. Hungry. It's going to be tough. Are you sure you want this?
The farm workers decide to vote on whether or not they should go on strike.
My name is John Armington, born and raised here in Delano.
In present-day Filipino Hall, I talked to John Armington, whose father, Mariano Laya Armington, also known as Bob, was a Filipino immigrant and a Delano farm worker. He was in Filipino Hall that fateful day.
My dad and our family were part of AWOC, Agriculture Workers Organizing Committee, and with Larry and Itliong, Philip Veracruz, Pete Velasco, and so many others, we're here in this hall where I'm talking to you now on September 7th, 1965, where we had a day-long second meeting about the strike. And when Larry asked if anyone could make a motion regarding the strike, my father stood and made the motion to begin the grape strike that started in Delano.
So Bob just made the motion to go on strike. Those in favor of the strike, stand up and raise your hands. High. Okay. So, 1, 2, 3. Oh, what the heck? Everyone's standing up. We're going on a strike, you crazy Filipinos.
The next day, September 8, 1965, the farm workers show up at the grape vineyards, ready for work. According to the documentary Delano Manongs by Marissa Arroy, just like any other day at work, the farm workers started picking ripe grapes off the vines. Then they'd set them down on the ground. They'd move on to the next vine, pick ripe grapes, set them down. Here's a clip from the film with organizer and United Farm Workers Vice President Pete Velasco.
We pick the ripe grapes and trim it and then move on to the next vine and do the same thing. At noon hour, there are a lot of picked grapes under the vines. That is when about 1,500 Filipinos went on strike against the grape growers in Delano.
Matapos ang prawning, matapos ang begging, magbibigaran na isang baboy. Yan ang mga old style. Di ba tayo makabili sa ganon kung ang ating kalagayan ay magpabuti? Yan ang isipin ninyo.
The strike is off to a good start, but the Filipinos quickly learn Delano is no Coachella. Growers use a variety of tactics to intimidate the strikers. They shut off power and water at the bunkhouses. They hire armed guards who beat the strikers and shoot at them. They hire Mexican workers as scabs to replace the Filipinos in the fields. After about a week of striking, Larry Itliong goes to Plan B. He reaches out to Cesar Chavez, who is organizing Mexican workers in a group called the National Farmworkers Association, or NFWA. Remember, at this point, Mexicans and Filipinos don't really work with each other. They're used to working in Filipino-only or Mexican-only crews because the growers segregated them. So this call for help was a bold move by Larry.
Caesar, we need your help. You're doing a great job organizing the Mexican workers, but how about we work together? Join us in our strike.
Okay, so no matter how much I research this part, the details are never really clear exactly what went down, how Larry called Caesar, or who said what when. Like, I wish I knew what the actual conversation was like. You know what I mean? But here's what we know. When Larry approaches Caesar, Caesar is hesitant. Even though he knows Larry, and his colleague Dolores Huerta used to work with him at AWOC, Caesar feels the Mexicans just aren't ready for a strike. He wants to wait, like a couple years. But Larry knows the Filipinos can't wait. They're much older than the other workers. They have a lot more to lose.
Look, some of your guys are crossing our picket line. Our guys will probably do the same to you later. We both lose. Our people lose. We need to work together.
Caesar says he talked to his people, the NFWA. At Guadalupe Church in Delano, the Mexican workers meet and vote, unanimously, to join the Filipinos on strike.
We are your brothers and sisters over here. Come on! Come on out! Estos papeles no los necesitan a ustedes como nosotros los necesitamos ahorita.
Don't believe the propaganda of the Giorgio. We want you to know that our struggle is not with you. Our struggle is with the grower. Don't support a cheap grower. Come to our aid. Help us with this huelga. 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 Come to our assistance.
For the first time, Filipinos and Mexicans work together. According to Journey for Justice, Filipino Hall becomes their union hall and strike kitchen, where they meet and share meals before heading out to the picket lines. They agree to a nonviolent movement, peacefully picketing vineyards and fields, encouraging other workers to join in. One Filipino worker, Paolo Agbayani, dies from a heart attack on the picket line. Still, the growers refuse to give in.
What do you think of the idea of a union for farm workers?
I think it's ridiculous.
Do you think that without a union, the farm workers can improve their condition and create better?
It has been done right here, quite a bit.
Is this camp evidence of that?
This camp has greatly improved in the last year.
Would you want to
since
live?
I have been here.
Would you want to live in this
I
camp?
wouldn't live here. You know, you're being very impudent.
What
Would
else?
I want to live here? This is, I call, an impudent question.
Will you run the camp?
I won't answer any more of your questions.
What starts as a strike turns into a national boycott of Delano grapes and a farm worker labor movement that goes from weeks to months to years. The Filipino AWOC and the Mexican NFWA joined together to form the United Farm Workers, or the UFW. Cesar Chavez becomes director, Larry Itliong assistant director, who leads a national boycott of grapes, traveling with volunteers around the country to convince people to boycott Delano grapes until the growers meet their demands. Millions of Americans boycott grapes and donate money, food, and clothing to the United Farm Workers. It's not just about a simple pay raise anymore. It's about basic workers' rights, including the right to form a union.
In the history of this country, there's never been any collective bargaining agreements between farm workers and farmers.
Cesar Chavez emerges as the face of this now movement.
It is not impossible to have a union. It is possible.
He leads a march from Delano to the state capitol in Sacramento and holds a historic 25-day fast, which brings more press and attention, even a visit from Robert F. Kennedy.
I think that what we need is some federal legislation which will be comparable to the legislation that we passed in the 1930s for other workers in this country. And the fact is that we haven't done that. The result has been that the farm workers have suffered and grown much more slowly economically than any other segment of our society. It's terribly unfair and very unreasonable and very, very unjust.
In 1970, after 5 long years, the United Farm Workers are finally recognized as a union. The grape growers agree to sign a union contract with a pay increase, health insurance, and other significant changes in the farm labor system. The workers actually win.
Anyway, we're going down Glenwood Street. It's all vacant now, but that was where all the monos hung out on weekends. They would come to town. I know it happened in Stockton. They would wear their nice suits and the fedora and all that. And this is the famous Cuckoo Club right to your left, which Larry Itliong and the UFW used to hang out. And there's on a corner, used to be a barbershop.
Roger Gaudiano grew up around the Manongs of Delano. He was a kid during the grape strike. Today, he leads tours of the city's Filipino history. On a yellow school bus full of students, teachers, families, and curious people like me and my fellow producer Patrick, we drive past old buildings and empty streets to learn about how the Manongs of Delano once lived.
The reason I do this is someone's got to tell the story. Someone's got to reflect on the impact of the Filipino-American history and Pinoys and Larry Itliong, and it's important. That's why I'm here.
Okay, so sometimes when we talk about big historical events, they feel so distant, unrelatable. But the Delano Grape Strike and what happened as a result of it was a really big deal. Today, there's plenty of union organizing happening in industries like auto and media, but this was a first for farm workers. And remember, these were poor people with not a lot of resources, and the Filipino farm workers were already in their 50s and 60s. Many didn't have families. They needed the money and access to proper health care just to survive. But they didn't get the best deal.
Part of the key thing in the contract was that the union would set up a hiring hall.
Miriam Powell again.
And the jobs would be given out by the union hiring hall as opposed to by the individual grower. So if you wanted to work, and you had worked every year on so-and-so's farm, you couldn't just go back there. You had to go to the hiring hall and get a dispatch to be sent to that place. And that was supposed to standardize the hiring in a way that so that people couldn't play games and get preferential treatment for their friends or their relatives, and it was supposed to be fairer. But first of all, it was a real mess because the union didn't know how to run a hiring hall, and it was really complicated, and so it was kind of a disaster.
The new hiring hall system was run by the majority Mexican members of the UFW. Under this new system, even though the Filipinos had worked for the local growers for 10, 20, even 30 years, they weren't considered as senior as the local Mexican members of the new union because the Filipinos were migrant. They traveled up and down the West Coast, following the crop cycle.
Chavez says the Filipinos thought that we were punishing them, but really we were just incompetent. And that's kind of true. But nonetheless, the Filipinos got particularly penalized by this new system. And so that really then began to exacerbate the issues between them and the feeling that even though they had started the strike and AWOC had been important and their leadership had been important, that they had really been marginalized.
Tensions rose between Mexican and Filipino union members and within the leadership of the UFW. Larry Itliong, who'd been critical of some of Cesar Chavez's actions, felt like he was pushed aside. Like the other old Manongs, he wanted to build a traditional union. But the union turned into a movement for farm workers, which was a good thing in a lot of ways, but it left out the needs of the elderly Manongs. The press and other civil rights activists called Cesar the leader of the farm worker movement. Larry and the Filipinos felt they were being written out of history. Larry resigned from the UFW in 1971. Many Filipinos left as well. A lot of them had lost their jobs, homes, and just like the migrant work they were used to, they had to move on.
The fact that the Filipinos went on strike initially and started the strike, that in and of itself, I mean, had they not done that, it's really unclear what would have happened with the farm worker movement. I mean, we don't know. But they started the grape strike, and it was kind of their discipline in striking and the fact that they had done it in May earlier that year in the Catella Valley. And a lot of the things about how they worked in crews and their discipline, I think a lot of those were things that the broader farm worker movement learned from. And Itliong was an important, I mean, he was the leader at that point. There was no question.
So the conditions of the Manongs prior to the building of Agbayani village, they were basically homeless.
That's Dylan Delvo, community leader, activist, and executive director of Little Manila Rising in Stockton, California. You might know him from episode 1 and 2 of this podcast. He's on the Delano Tour with me and a whole group of folks, young and old, here in town for the Journey for Justice book launch event. We're at 40 Acres, the first headquarters of the United Farm Workers, in a single-story brick building called Palo Agbayani Village, a retirement complex built for the old Filipino farm workers in 1974, named after the Filipino farm worker who died on the picket line during the grape strike. The village was built to provide the old Manongs a, quote, place to live out their final years in dignity and security. But when I look around the complex, there aren't that many rooms. Was this place enough for them?
How many Manongs lived here?
I would say at its peak, probably 30, 40.
30, 40?
Yeah.
Only 30 to 40 Manongs. Yet the living area we're in shows photos of so many more of them. Where'd they all go? And if this was a home for the Filipino farm workers, why is there only one photo of one of their leaders, Larry Itliong? There's a whole room of Cesar Chavez photos and memorabilia. It's hard not to miss. Larry, on the other hand, has a modest framed photo tucked in a corner. Christine Boholano Block asks our tour guide, Roger Gaudiano, a question.
Yes.
There's a commemorative stamp for Cesar Chavez. Is there a drive or push to get a stamp in honor of Larry Itliong?
No, not that I know. I know they got schools named for Philip and Manong Larry. I don't know. That's a good point. We should have that. That's another goal you should have. You guys know of any Filipino stamp at all? No. Oh well. But you know what? They did show the Manongs, the Forgotten Heroes on PBS. You know, that's a step. You know, we're the largest Asian group in California.
I'm going to be very frank with you. I have all kinds of guts, you know. I'm not scared of nobody. And I'm a son of a bitch in terms of fighting for what I think is right, in terms of fighting for the rights of Filipinos in this country.
Larry Itliong passed away just a few years after Agbayani Village was built. The same day I visit the village, our tour leads us to Larry's grave. It's in Delano, a humble stone in green grass. You'd never know that this is where a man some people consider a civil rights hero, a leader of his people, was laid to rest. It's the same feeling I get walking around Agbayani Village, the final home for some of those farm worker Manongs, the brave souls who were some of the first to leave their homeland for better futures, without knowing what lay ahead. Before leaving Agbayani Village, I stand in the garden just outside the simple studio apartments. I see tall palm trees in the far end and vast open fields. It reminds me of a province in the Philippines, until I'm snapped out of it by music coming from one of the rooms, which now house residents who are primarily Latino. This place has changed so much since the days of the Manongs, when Larry Itliong and the farm workers made their way through here every year during the grape season. And while I wish they had something more, like a happier ending, a more appropriate memorial, I take comfort in the idea that there are people who still care about them, who are trying to pass their stories on. Hopefully, that keeps their memories and stories alive.
Hey, baby, won't you come along with me?
This episode was written, edited, mixed, and hosted by me, Paola Mardo. Long Distance is produced by Patrick Epino and me. You can learn more about this story in the show notes on our website, longdistanceradio.com. We've got photos and a list of materials used in the making of this episode, like resources, clips, and links to more information about how to get a copy of Journey for Justice and where to watch the film Delano Manongs. Plus, you can watch a very special episode of our trip to Delano on Long Distance TV. As you heard on the episode, we got to go to some really cool places like Agbayani Village, Filipino Hall, Larry Itliong's grave, and more. So please, please, please check it out on our documentary video series for this podcast, directed by Patrick Epino.
Sup?
This season of Long Distance is produced with support from PRX and the Google Podcast Creator Program, as well as our donors on PayPal and our Patreon members, supporters, and ambassadors. To learn more about supporting the show, head to longdistanceradio.com/support. Special thanks to Gail Romasanta, Paloma Concordia, Marissa Arroy, John Armington, Dylan Delvo and Deborah Louie of Little Manila Rising, and Samantha Hilu Hernandez. Music in this episode is by Blue Dot Sessions. Theme song is by Sea Light and the Prisms. That's it for this episode of Long Distance. Thank you so much for listening and sticking with us. See you next time.
Hey, baby, won't you come along with me? And I will show you, baby, what that only you and I could see.